Hi everyone, welcome to the next part of this painting guide series that I've been doing. What I'm going to be looking at today is the AT-RT for the Rebel Force. So this is quite a cool model. It's a pretty large one, it's on a pretty big base. It's basically a one-man walker with a selection of guns that you can pick from. So assembling it was a little bit of a pain. These sort of pistons here going down the back of the leg, they're fitted individually, so fitting it was a bit of a pain, and I just had to kind of glue it in place rather than fitting it in the peg. When you assemble the model as well, you need to make sure that it's kind of facing towards one of these notches, because these actually indicate its front firing arc with the gun, which attaches here. So I'm pretty much going with the same scheme for the driver, the pilot, whatever you want to call him, as I did for the rest of the Rebels I've done. And for the actual AT-RT itself, I'm going to be going for sort of like a metal grey kind of look. Not a metallic, but like a painted metal. So the first step I've actually got to take is to fix a mistake I made. So I primed this with black paint, and then thought I'd give it a zenithal highlight with grey. Unfortunately, as you can see, the grey paint I had was running out. It was right towards the end of the can. So it's left a kind of blotchy, not a very nice surface to paint on. So I'm going to give it a one more coat, a very thin one, with this Vallejo light grey. Now I'm going to do this through my airbrush because it will give me a thinner coat to actually work on. But I guess if you were doing this from scratch, you could probably prime it. You need to prime it first, it goes without saying. Prime it grey and then give it a coat of something like Vallejo light grey, as that's going to give us the base we're going to work on for most of the metal. So I'll come back once that's done, and I'll show you exactly why I did that. So now you can see, having run that through the airbrush, it's actually giving a much better finish. It's much smoother, it's much more even, and so we can actually start painting the model without worrying about any potential imperfections showing through from the undercoat. Now, while I was spraying it, the pilot, or the rider, his arm did fall off. So gonna have to super glue it back on, which isn't an issue. I mean, it helps. It means I can get to more of the bits and pieces in out here if the arm's not attached. So the first thing I'm actually going to do is paint the rider, get the majority of that done. I've done previously a video on painting the Rebels, and this was the finished piece. So I'm basically going to be going for the same look, using the same colours, and so if you want to know how to paint that, I have got a separate video, so just check out my playlist. I'm going to be using a sort of like a combination of Vallejo colours, some contrast colours from Citadel, and then just other bits and pieces. So once I've got this guy painted up and all the base colours down, I'll come back and I'll show you when we move on to the AT-RT itself. So I've put the washes down on the driver, and whilst they're drying, I'm going to start looking over the body of the AT-RT itself and picking out sort of like areas where it looks like there might be panels that would be a different colour. So for that, I'm going to be using Vallejo Game Colour Heavy Grey. It's not actually a grey, it's a very sort of like green colour. So I'll be putting this, and you can see just kind of, there's some areas down here where there's like a panel down here, there's panels on the legs. They just look like they might stand out a bit better being a different colour. So I'm going to go over the model, see what bits look like they could do with just being a different colour, and to give a little bit of a difference in the overall sort of like look of the machine. So once I do that, we're going to move on to adding some sort of like weathering and chipping to those bits. And I suppose I should give credit here because I was watching a tutorial by Sarastro last night, and I've been watching his tutorials for a few years now, and I always forget about them, but whenever I think this is how I want to paint something, it's pretty much exactly what he's done. So they're fantastic. I definitely recommend checking them out. So once I'm going ahead doing this, I'll then come back and show you the bits that I've picked out. So now you can see I've added a bit of green to the actual chassis and body of the Walker. This is mostly just to sort of like try and break it up a little bit, make it look a little bit different. If it's all grey, it'll look fine, but I wanted it to look a bit more interesting. So I've added sort of like some lining around the edges here. I've added the green on sort of like the caps, green on some of the plates, green on sort of like what looks like an exhaust here. If you turn it around, I sort of like made it as symmetrical as I can, making sure that I pick out bits where they need to be. I'm going to do it with a couple of other colours, maybe some orange, maybe some yellow, to sort of like maybe make it look a little bit more like warning plates, something where, say for example, you can see some sort of tube in here. I might do that sort of like a yellow or an orange, just to sort of like, it might be hazardous, I don't know, something along those lines. But after I've done that, I'm going to start adding a little bit of weathering, and so to do that, I'll be using a sponge, and I'll be going back with the original colour, so it will be the Vallejo model colour, light grey. The idea for that is that actually I can bring it back to the base colour itself and make it look like the paint's chipped away. I'm normally quite careful with this because the sponge, as you can see, it's got a very straight edge, so you've got to be careful that you're just maybe using a corner or a bit which is a little bit rougher, so that you're not getting just sort of like a full stamp onto the model. So I'll do that lightly, going around, just sort of like picking out edges, picking out some bits that look natural. And after we've done that, we'll have a look at what the next step will be. So we've got the first round of chipping on, and the idea to this is just really to give you some areas where the green paint itself has worn away. I haven't yet actually added the alternate colours I said I would, so I'll do that in a moment. I might add some darker areas as well to some of the pistons, just to give it a little bit more detail. But after this, the next step is going to be adding some washes. So the washes I'll be using will be the Citadel non-oil. It's a pretty standard wash. I'll possibly mix in some Quick Shade Strong Tone, just to give it a bit of a brown tint as well. And I'm tempted, I'll let you know if I do, to try a bit of Athonian Camo Shade as well in there, just for a bit of green. I may do that on some smaller patches rather than over entire parts of the model, so I'll let you know how I get on with that and whether I decide to go ahead and do that. So I'll come back after all these shades and the extra colours have been added and let you see what the progress looks like. So with the wash now dry, we're going to start looking a bit more at the details again. So where you can see the orange and the yellow wiring there, I'm actually going to give it a bit of a wash. I'm going to use a contrast paint for that. I'm going to use this Glimmer Flesh. Not a massive fan of it for skin tones, but actually for washing anything to give it a bit more of a red shade to it, it actually is perfect. It works very, very well on gold as well. And then once we've done that, we're going to start going back over the grey on the body here, bits and pieces, just back over with the model colour light grey, and I'm going to dilute that down a little bit with some glaze medium. So we're going to start to build up some layers of highlights on here, leaving the areas where it's darker and just sort of picking out edges, possibly some of the larger flat panels a little bit, some of the bits around the hubs of the like the hinge bits on the legs, I suppose. Just picking out very slowly some highlights, not too hard. That's why I've got the glaze medium there, so you don't want them to be edge highlights like you might see on some Space Marines. I want it to be quite subtle. So I'll go ahead and do those, and then I'll come back and show you what it looks like, and I'll explain sort of where we're going to take it from there. So I've done the first highlight. It's not particularly neat, but you can see areas where I've sort of like highlighted on the feet, on the legs here, a little bit of like preliminary areas here that I've made some battle damage on there. I think what I might do is go back in again and just sort of like fill in some of the bits where I've highlighted, and then potentially add a little bit of model colour off-white to the mix, just to try and highlight a little bit more. After that though, it's almost done. I might add some highlights to the green areas, go back into that and add some bits onto there. But other than that, yeah, coming along quite nicely. So I think what I'll probably do is go again, highlight some of the engine parts here. I've still got to paint the handles up here. I'll probably do those some sort of brown colour. The seat still needs to be done, which I'll probably, again, do brown. The guns, as you might notice, the guns aren't attached there. I'm going to paint those separately, so I'll cut through to those soon. But I'm going to go ahead, tinker around a little bit more, and what I'll do is I'll come back and show you what I did once I've actually completed it. So while some of the washes dry on the AT-RT itself, I'm going to have a quick look at the weaponry that's available. Not actually sure what's what, because I don't have the cards for this model, but we seem to have some sort of flamethrower. Seems to be. I assume that's a canister at the back there. We've got something which looks like a high-powered blaster, maybe some sort of like anti-tank style thing. And then we've got this sort of like heavy-looking repeating blaster, a bit like a Gatling gun. Looks very cool. They all slot in under the front of the AT-RT, so a bit of glue on the knob here and that'll go in nicely. So to paint all of these, the first steps I'm going to be doing is just painting the metal. So I'll be using Vallejo Game Colour gunmetal mixed with some model colour black, simply to give me a darker base colour to start with. The Sibin primed black, which is different to what I did for the actual AT-RT. The AT-RT was primed in grey. So whenever I'm painting metallics like this, I like to start with a black undercoat. So I'll give these a coat, let it dry, and come back and show you how it's getting on. You can't see it, but they've had a coat of the mix of gunmetal and black. Now, just going to go back over with a dry brush of gunmetal, and then depending how that looks, might take it up a notch with a dry brush of Game Colour silver. It's going to depend how good this looks before I decide whether it needs an extra layer. So, going to do that, come back, show you how it looks. So with the dry brush applied, you can see it's already looking much brighter, picking out some of the details. That's just with the Game Colour gunmetal, so I think I'm going to leave it at that, to be honest. I don't want it to be too light. I will come back, and I think for the flamethrower, I'm going to paint this canister a different colour. Some of the bits, they've got some sort of like piping on here. On this one there looks like to be some sort of wiring there, so I'll paint those more sort of like standard colours, and probably might try blacken the muzzle a little bit, but not going to go too over the top on it. So when the guns are on, they'll actually look like this. Zoom out a little bit. So let's see if you can. So they fit in the bottom like that, so you can see how it's going to look. This is going to need, actually, it's going to need more work on it. I think potentially a wash, maybe some other colours, because the rest of the Walker is absolutely filthy, and the gun looks pristine and brand new. So it's definitely going to need a wash, definitely going to need some sort of like scratching and weathering effects on it. But that's it for that. I mean, while we're here, we'll take a look at the progress on the Walker. Take this off. The Walker has now been, I've added some chipping to it. To do that, I used the sponge technique I did before, and I actually took, so first off was Game Colour black mixed with gunmetal, same mix as I used for the guns themselves, and then trusty old scrap of sponge, just dabbed onto everything. After that, I went over with a relatively thin, actually no I didn't, sorry, no, didn't thin it down at that point. Added some heavy sienna, and again sponge, just to give sort of like, you can kind of see the areas where there's sort of like brown, rusty bits. These patches, there we go, these were all done with the heavy sienna on a sponge. And then after that, just kind of like went back to what I was doing previously with a little bit of the, put it back in the box, the heavy grey and white using a brush to just pick out sort of some of the areas where there's a little bit of sort of like chipping. You can't really see it too much. You could probably skip that step. You could skip this whole step actually if you wanted a newer looking walker. But let's be honest, something like this it looks a bit cool. It's quite dirty and grim. So we're getting there with the walker. Just need to finish painting up the rider himself. One other thing I did with the heavy grey and the white, I did a bit of chipping on the back here, just a bit more detail. I had highlighted this, what looks to be some sort of like engine or battery unit, with some just black grey mixed in with a bit of the white, just to add a little bit of contrast on those bits. So it's looking good. I mean, I'm quite happy with how it's coming out. Going to ask Josh if he wants it this grimy or if he wanted it cleaner. Bit late if he wanted it cleaner. Sorry, mate. But yeah, going to move on now to finishing off the rider, and then I think from there I'm going to evaluate what bits need to be done still. But I'll be back soon with some more updates. So I've gone ahead and actually done a bit more than I planned to ahead of this video, and just some sort of basic things. I finished off the rider, so you can see I've added some camouflage to his trousers. I have got a video for painting Star Wars Legion Rebel troops, so check that out if you want to see how I've done the camouflage. I've gone around and just sort of picked up any extra bits that need to be highlighted here and there, added some extra sort of chipping with some metallic paint. I finished off the laser cannons. They've all had a wash of Nuln Oil just to kind of try and make them a little bit grimier. So they're looking pretty good now. I went round and some of the parts I've just added small highlights here and there, as you can see the red markings on the back, just to try and make it just look a little bit more interesting. Like there's a little bit more detail. Like I've done the wire that's exposed there, the wire under the cannon. After that, I went ahead and actually I've now based the model as well. So again, I've got a separate video on how to base these, and it's a very woodland scene feeling, very much like Endor, using a variety of different materials that I've got. But I also, if we zoom in here, putting a little bit of extra detail on this one. So this is a tuft at the back here. This is, I think, from Gamer's Grass. It's a 10mm tuft, so it's nice and long and quite bushy. This is clump foliage from Woodland Scenics. You just buy it by the bag, and normally people use it for trees, but I quite like ripping it off and putting it on bases. Same technique otherwise, with the addition of some rocks, as you can see, so a couple of rocks, and then these pieces of wood. These are just out of my garden, but what I've done is just put them in place so they mark out the firing arc. You can see I have left some base visible through there, so you can see the firing arc on the base exactly. But I wanted to put something on there so that you could kind of see what it looks like without having to get too close to the model itself. Sort of like a visual representation of where the firing arc is. But yeah, that's obviously I've not glued the laser cannon in because I don't know what one Josh wants on there, so I've left them loose, so you just pop in and out. I'll take that off. But yeah, and I hope this has proved useful. If anyone is painting this and it's been useful, please let me know. If you've got any feedback, try and do that bit. Leave a comment, like the video, and let me know how you thought it went. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.